All right, guys, are there any questions on any of the assignments thus far? Now, what we're covering today is centroids. What we're looking at today is centroids. Now, a centroid is the point where the three lines that are connecting a vertex and the midpoint of a line meet. So E, D, and F are the midpoints of each side. And when we draw the line from that midpoint to the angle opposite it, the spot where all three lines intersect is the centroid. Now, the centroid has an interesting property in that the entire length of the line, so here it would be AE. If we take it and multiply it by 2/3, we will get the larger side, AP. So the length from the vertex to the centroid, this here, is equal to 2/3 of the whole. So the whole line, if I take the whole line's length and multiply it by 2/3, I will get the length of AP. Now, if we take the whole line and multiply it by 1/3, we will get PE, the shorter side. So the entire line from the centroid is equal to 2/3 of the whole. So the whole, the bigger side, bigger section, is equal to 2/3 of the whole. The smaller segment is equal to 1/3 of the whole. So with the centroid, guys, and the distance from the vertex to the centroid is equal to 2/3 of the whole length. The distance from the centroid to the edge or the side is 1/3 of the whole. Now, something else that's pretty interesting with this here is we'll draw a line. Erase all that there. This here. So the distance from P to E. Take this and clone it. If we take this length, the shorter length, and line it up with the other line, two of them will actually make the whole line. So really what this is telling us is that the smaller segment is equal to half of the bigger segment, or that the bigger segment is equal to twice the smaller, because there's three of them that make up the whole thing, because that's why we're dividing into 2/3 and 1/3. Guys? So the entire length is 1/3 of the whole. Three of them will make up the whole length. For the bigger section, two of them will make up the whole, 2/3 of the whole. And the bigger is half of the smaller. And this, well, the bigger is twice the smaller, and the smaller is half of the bigger. So when we look at this here, let's look at the first one. Now they tell us that the distance from S to Q is 8. This is going to be the bigger segment, because the bigger segment is always going to go from the centroid to the angle, which makes QW the smaller segment. How long would the smaller segment for this here be? 4. Because the smaller is half the bigger. Smaller segment is half of the bigger. So QW for this here would be 4. What would SW be? And get 12. Now what's 1/3 of 12? The whole length. Because if we take 1/3 and multiply it by the whole length, we would get 4, which is our smaller. If we would have multiplied 12 not by 1/3, but by 2/3, because the whole times 2/3 would give us the bigger length. What is 2/3 times 12? Because 12 divided by 3 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8.
Barely missed it.
Now, it did give us the other lengths. What would the distance from Q to V be?
5.
Because the bigger is 10. 5. RV. Because we'd add the two together to get 15. And QU. QU would be, because the bigger section is 12, and UT would be 18. And that's it. Because if we're given the whole section and we want the bigger or smaller, we can multiply it by 2/3 to get the bigger section, or 1/3 to get the smaller. And then we could go from smaller to bigger or bigger to smaller. Any questions on this here? All right, let's look at the next one. So we'll find RQ, RV, SQ, SW, and then UT and UQ. We'll find them all just because we have the numbers for it. There's not too much more. Yeah. Because that's the ones that it just asked for, but let's go on and find them all anyways. So QV is 5. What would QR be? 10, because it's twice the smaller. So RQ is 10. What would RV be? Because we'd add the two together. What is SQ? 4, because it is the bigger, so it's twice the smaller, and the smaller is 2. What would SW be? 6, because we can add the two together. How about UT? 15, because UQ is 5. That's it. Any questions on this here?
This is really easy. I like that.
CE is 17. What is EF? So point E is a centroid. So we're going from smaller to bigger or bigger to smaller? Bigger to smaller. So the smaller is equal to what? Half of the bigger segment. Well, what's the bigger segment? So we're taking half of 17, or dividing 17 by 2, taking half. So what is 17 divided by 2? What does 17 divide by 2 evenly? No. This here would be 8 point. So EF is 8.5. What would FC be? Because we'd take 8.5 and add to it what? 17. So we'd have 0.5. 8 and 7 would be here, the 1. 25.5. That's it. Questions on this here? Okay. Let's look at the next one. UP is 7.3. It wants us to find RU. Well, RU is the bigger, yes? And the smaller is equal to what? The bigger is equal to what? Because if we use half, we're going from bigger to, so what are we going from here? From smaller to, so we're not going to use half, we're going to use 2. So we're going to multiply 7.3 by 2. Would be RU. And then RP would be what? Well, to find that, we would take 14.6 and add to it what? 7.3. 6 and 3 would be 9. So we'd have 21.9. Any questions on this here? Now, before we move on to the next part, let's say that, Are we good to move on to the next thing? So before we move on to the next problem, let's say that SQ is, I'm just going to pick a number, say 27. We want to find SU and QU. How can we find these? What is SQ? SQ is what? The whole line, isn't it? So the bigger section is equal to what? Compared to the whole. The bigger is what to the whole? 2/3. So I could go from the bigger section, SU, comparing it to the whole, because SU is our bigger, which is 2/3 of the whole. Well, what's the whole segment? Now, if I wanted QU, QU is the smaller, yes? And is what compared to the whole? So we can do it either way. Because if we're given the whole length is, the bigger section is 2/3 of the whole. 2 of them added together, because 2 of the smaller sections will make up the whole thing for the bigger, because the bigger is twice the smaller, yes? Smaller is half the bigger, because we deal with those, yes? Now, how many of the smaller sections make the bigger one? 2, yes? How many of the smaller sections make the whole? Well, 3, because it's in thirds. So 2 of the smaller sections is what this is dealing with, 1 of them here. So if I take the whole segment and multiply it by 2/3, I will get the bigger. If I multiply by 1/3, I get the smaller. Okay. So 1/3 times 27 is? Or 27 divided by 3 is? And 2/3 times 27 would be 18. What is 18 plus 9? Because what's the whole length? Because if we're given the whole segment, once we find the two, they should add together, back together to give us the whole. Any questions on this here? Let's look at the next problem. So we're told that these are medians. So O is the centroid. Now we're told that EM is 2x plus 3. And MG is x plus 5. We want to find the value of x. Now a centroid connects the median, or the middle of each line, to the angle on the opposite side, which means these line segments are congruent. So really what we can say is that 2x plus 3 is equal to what? Solve for the value of x. So we can subtract x from both sides, which here 2x minus x is x plus 3 is equal to Now, do we need to plug it back in? What did it ask? Just ask for x. So we'd be done. Now, if we wanted the actual length, we could plug it back in. Which one would be easier to plug back into? 2 plus 5 is? This one here would be? That's it. Questions on this here? So again, we have medians, which is just telling us that each one of these segments are split in half. Now we're told that RV is 4x plus 3. VT is 2x plus 9, and WS is 5x minus 1. And it wants to know what is the value of RW. Do we have anything that is congruent or equal in this? Because aren't these two lengths here congruent? And I can use those to find the value of x, and once we find the value of x, we can plug it in here. So we can start off by setting 2x plus 9 equal to what? What do we do first? So we can subtract 2x from both sides to get the variables on the same side. Well, 2x minus 2x is 0. So 9 is equal to? Nine minus 3 is? At this point, we can divide both sides by 2 and say that x is equal to Any questions on how we found the value of x? Now at this point here, we can plug it back in. So 5 times 3 minus 1. Well, 5 times 3 is 15, minus 1 is. So the length of this line is, so WR has to be WR is 14, because those two segments are congruent. Any questions on this here? We good to move on? The last thing that we have, or last kind of parts, is the altitude of a triangle. An altitude is just the height of a triangle. An altitude is the perpendicular segment from the vertex to the opposite side or line that contains the opposite side. Because if it is an obtuse triangle, we can't have an altitude or a height of the triangle that is outside the triangle. It's not actually in it. So we'd have to extend the side length to get the altitude. Now, when we draw the three altitudes of a triangle, where they meet, it's called the orthocenter. The orthocenter is where the three heights of the triangle intersect, or the three altitudes. Now, this here can actually end up being in different spots. Because when the triangle is acute, all three angles are less than 90, the orthocenter is inside the triangle. However, if it is a right triangle, the orthocenter is actually on the triangle itself, where that right angle is. And if the triangle is obtuse, well, the orthocenter ends up being outside the triangle. It's actually not contained in the triangle. That's it. Any questions on any of this here? And that is it. Now, you don't have to do question number 27.